Stoicism. The most famous book on finding inner peace was written by a man who knew almost none of it. In 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius became the Emperor of Rome, a position that offered absolute power and limitless luxury. But his reality was a relentless nightmare. Almost immediately after taking the throne, the empire was hit by the Antonine Plague, a pandemic that killed 5 million people and destabilized the entire economy. Bodies were being carted out of Rome by the thousands every single day. At the same time, the northern borders collapsed. Germanic tribes flooded across the Danube, forcing Marcus to leave the safety of the palace. He spent the majority of his reign living in a freezing, damp military tent on the front lines of the Marcomannic Wars in modern-day Austria. He was not surrounded by philosophers. He was surrounded by dying soldiers, disease, and mud. To keep from losing his sanity, Marcus developed a private ritual. Late at night, he wrote notes to himself. These were not intended for publication. They were strict, logical commands designed to suppress panic and anger. When his most trusted general, Avidius Cassius, betrayed him and launched a coup to steal the throne, Marcus did not scream or rage. He went to his journal. He wrote that the betrayal was outside of his control, and therefore it could not hurt his character. He marched his army to crush the rebellion with a terrifying, detached calmness. History calls him the Philosopher King, but he was really a survivor. He proved Stoicism was not about suppressing emotion for the sake of it. It was a necessary tool for functioning in a world that was falling apart. When he died at a military post, he left behind Meditations, a book that proved you can be the most powerful man on earth and still realize the only thing you truly own is your mind. Nihilism. The philosophy that declared the death of meaning did not begin in a classroom. It began with a mental breakdown in the streets of Turin. On January 3rd, 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche witnessed a cab driver brutally whipping a horse. Instead of ignoring it, Nietzsche ran into the street and threw his arms around the animal's neck to shield it from the blows. He collapsed on the cobblestones, weeping uncontrollably, and never recovered his sanity. Before the silence took him, he wrote, "God is dead." He was not celebrating. He was issuing a warning. He saw the structures holding Western civilization together dissolving. Religion, objective truth, moral certainty. He realized that without these illusions, humanity would be left staring into a void, forced to confront the terrifying reality that the universe is indifferent to suffering. But he offered one difficult exit. If the universe refuses to give you meaning, then you must possess the strength to create your own. You have to stare into the abyss until it stops staring back. Absurdism. If nihilism is the paralysis of finding no meaning, then absurdism is the violent decision to live anyway. This philosophy was defined by Albert Camus, a man who formulated his ideas while living through the Nazi occupation of Paris. Surrounded by war and execution squads, he asked the only question that truly mattered to him: does the pointlessness of life require you to kill yourself? He answered it by retelling the myth of Sisyphus. In the story, Sisyphus is cursed to roll a massive boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down every time he reaches the top. It is a torture designed to be perfectly futile. Camus argued this is the exact state of human existence, the desperate, endless struggle to find significance in a world that offers none. But instead of surrendering to despair, Camus imagined Sisyphus watching the rock roll down and deciding to walk back after it. He realized the struggle itself was enough to fill a man's heart. By accepting the futility and pushing the rock anyway, you are not just surviving. You are rebelling against the universe itself. Cynicism. Long before Stoicism, there was a philosophy that claimed civilization itself was a trap. Diogenes of Sinope did not write books. He performed his philosophy through radical acts of poverty. He believed society was a fake construct designed to make people miserable. So, he chose to live like a stray animal. He slept in a large ceramic jar on the streets of Athens, owned nothing, and publicly mocked the social norms of the Greeks. His defining moment occurred when Alexander the Great came to visit him. Alexander found Diogenes sunbathing in the dirt and offered to grant him any wish he desired. Diogenes did not ask for gold or a position in the court. He gestured for the emperor to step aside because he was blocking the sunlight. It was a rejection of power that stunned the ancient world. The conqueror realized he had to subjugate the entire globe to feel satisfied, while the beggar in the dirt was already content. Diogenes proved you cannot lose what you do not want. Epicureanism. While the Stoics were preparing for war, Epicurus was building a garden. Around 306 BC, he purchased a house on the outskirts of Athens and founded a school cut off from the politics and stress of the city. He believed the root of human misery was the fear of death and the desire for things you do not need. His philosophy is often mistaken for gluttony, but the reality was the opposite. Epicurus and his followers lived on bread, water, and olives. He taught that true pleasure was not about excess. It was about the absence of pain and anxiety. By retreating into the garden, he created a commune where friendship was valued above romance, and simple conversations were valued above status. He argued that if you can conquer your fear of the gods and your fear of death, you can live like a god among men. He did not try to change the world. He built a wall to keep it out. Buddhism. The philosophy of enlightenment began with a prince who was desperately trying to escape reality. Siddhartha Gautama was born into a golden cage in 5th century BC India. His father, the king, wanted to protect him from the harshness of the world, so he built high walls around the palace and filled the grounds with young, healthy, beautiful people. Siddhartha lived in a manufactured paradise, where sickness, old age, and death were forbidden from entering. But the illusion shattered when the prince slipped past the guards and ventured into the city. For the first time, he saw a decrepit old man, a diseased beggar, and a rotting corpse. The shock of reality broke him. He realized his luxury was a trap, and that suffering was the only inevitable truth. In the middle of the night, he kissed his sleeping wife and son goodbye, cut off his royal hair, and vanished into the forest. For 6 years, he tried to starve the suffering out of himself, eating only a single grain of rice a day until his ribs poked through his skin like the rafters of a collapsed roof. But the pain did not bring wisdom. It brought more pain. He realized neither extreme luxury nor extreme self-denial was the answer. He sat beneath a Bodhi tree and vowed not to move until he understood the mechanism of suffering. After 49 days, he realized pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering is created by the desire for things to be different than they are. He stood up not as a prince, but as the awakened one. Machiavellianism, the manual for ruthless power, was written by a man who had lost everything. In 1513, Niccolò Machiavelli was a failed diplomat in the Republic of Florence. When the Medici family returned to power, they purged the government. Machiavelli was arrested and thrown into a dungeon. He was subjected to the strappato, a torture method where the prisoner is hoisted into the air by the wrists, dislocating the shoulders. After weeks of agony, he was released and banished to a small quiet farm in the countryside. He spent his days arguing with local butchers and gambling for pennies. But at night, he washed the mud off his body, put on his old court robes, and entered his study. There he wrote The Prince. It was not a book about how the world should be. It was a brutal analysis of how the world actually is. He argued that a ruler cannot afford to be good. To survive, a leader must learn how to be a liar, a beast, and a hypocrite. It is better to be feared than loved, because love is fickle, but fear is constant. He wrote the book as a desperate job application, hoping the Medici would read it and hire him back. They never did. Platonism. Western philosophy was forged in a prison cell in Athens in 399 BC. Socrates, a 70-year-old stonecutter who spent his life questioning authority, was put on trial. His crime was corrupting the youth and impiety, but his real crime was embarrassing the leaders of the city by proving they knew nothing. The jury voted for death. Socrates had every opportunity to escape. His friends bribed the guards and arranged a boat to take him into exile. But Socrates refused to leave. He argued he had lived by the laws of Athens his entire life, and breaking them now just to save his body would betray his soul. He spent his final hour discussing the immortality of the soul with his weeping friends, remaining the only calm person in the room. When the executioner brought the cup of hemlock, Socrates did not hesitate. He drank it as if it were wine. He walked around the cell until his legs felt heavy, then lay down. As the poison crept toward his heart, he uttered his final words, reminding a friend to pay a debt of a rooster to the god of healing. He treated death not as a tragedy, but as a cure for the sickness of life. Existentialism. The philosophy of radical freedom was forged in front of a firing squad. In 1849, Fyodor Dostoevsky was arrested by the Tsar's secret police. He was dragged to Semyonov Square in St. Petersburg and lined up against a wall with other prisoners. The soldiers raised their rifles. The priest read the last rites. Dostoevsky was minutes away from oblivion. He stared at the golden dome of a nearby cathedral, watching sunlight bounce off the roof, believing it was the last thing he would ever see. But at the very last second, a messenger rode in, waving a white flag. The execution was a mock execution, a psychological torture tactic designed to break them. Dostoevsky was sent to a Siberian labor camp for 4 years. Inside the camp, surrounded by murderers and thieves, his old worldview collapsed. He realized stripping a man of freedom does not destroy him. It forces him to find a deeper freedom inside himself. He saw that even in the filth of the gulag, humans have the terrifying responsibility to choose their own attitude. He survived to write Crime and Punishment, arguing that while we cannot control the world, we are condemned to be free. Pythagoreanism. Before mathematics was a science, it was a lethal cult. In the 6th century, BC, Pythagoras established a secret society in Croton, Italy. His followers did not just solve equations. They worshiped numbers as gods. They believed the universe was built on perfect rational ratios, clean fractions that explained everything from music to the movement of the stars. But the order was shattered by one of their own. A disciple named Hippasus discovered something impossible. The diagonal of a square cannot be expressed as a fraction. It was an irrational number, infinite, chaotic. The discovery threatened to destroy the entire worldview. Hippasus spoke about the flaw openly. Legend says the Pythagoreans took him out to sea and threw him overboard to drown. They murdered him to protect the purity of their math. It was the first time men killed not for land or gold, but to protect themselves from an uncomfortable truth. Daoism, the philosophy of effortless action, began with a man trying to quit civilization. Lao Tzu was the keeper of the archives for the Zhou dynasty. He watched the kingdom rot from the inside. Corrupt officials, endless wars, people chasing status. He realized the harder people tried to control the world, the more chaotic it became. So he left. He climbed onto a water buffalo and rode west, heading for the wilderness. At the final gate, a guard named Yinshi stopped him and demanded he write down his knowledge. Lao Tzu wrote 5,000 characters, not laws, not rules. He wrote about the Tao, the way. The oak breaks in the storm because it is rigid. The bamboo survives because it bends. He taught that the only way to conquer the world is to stop trying to conquer it. He handed over the scroll, rode through the gate, and was never seen again. Skepticism, the philosophy of absolute doubt, did not start in a library. It started in a war zone. Pyrrho of Elis joined the army of Alexander the Great. He witnessed slaughter and collapse. But what broke him was not violence. It was the gymnosophists of India. He watched a monk calmly burn alive, without flinching, without screaming. Pyrrho realized pain, fear, and death were not objective truths. They were opinions. He returned to Greece indifferent to everything. He would not dodge wagons. He would not flinch from danger. His students had to physically pull him away from cliffs. He taught that peace comes when you stop trusting your senses and admit you know nothing. Confucianism, the foundation of Chinese society, was built by a man who died believing he failed. Confucius lived during a time of brutal civil war. He believed order could be restored through ritual respect and hierarchy. He tried to advise kings. He was ignored, mocked, and exiled. He wandered for 14 years, starving and rejected. While his students panicked, he played music. He died thinking his life was wasted. He never knew his teachings would guide China for 2,000 years. Empiricism, the scientific method, was born from a fatal experiment. Francis Bacon believed truth comes from testing reality, not authority. In 1626, he tried to freeze a chicken with snow. The experiment worked, but he caught pneumonia and died days later. He proved knowledge requires direct collision with reality, no matter the cost. Dualism, the idea that the mind and body are separate entities, did not come from a university. It came from a hallucination inside a stove. In 1619, René Descartes was a soldier in the 30 Years' War, stationed in a freezing town in Germany. The winter was so brutal that to survive the night, Descartes climbed inside a large masonry heater to sleep. Inside the pitch black heat, delirious from exhaustion and isolation, he had a series of vivid, terrifying dreams. He believed a demonic spirit was trying to deceive him, manipulating his senses to make him see a world that was not there. He realized that everything he knew could be a lie created by this demon. He stripped away everything that could be doubted until only one thing remained: the fact that he was doubting. He could not trust his body, but he had to trust the mind that was doing the thinking. He emerged the next morning with the phrase, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore, I am. He had cleaved the universe in two, separating the mechanical, unreliable body from the floating, immortal soul. Asceticism, the ultimate rejection of the world, was performed by a man who refused to touch the ground. Simeon Stylites was a monk in 4th century Syria who found that living in a monastery was not painful enough. He wanted to escape the corruption of society completely, but crowds kept following him to ask for miracles, so he decided to go vertical. He built a pillar, eventually raising it to 50 feet high, and climbed to the top. He stayed there for 37 years. He exposed himself to scorching sun and freezing rain, refusing to come down for any reason. He stood on one leg for so long that he developed gangrene. When worms infested his flesh and fell from the platform, he asked his disciples to pick them up and put them back, saying, "Eat what God has given you." He became a spectacle. Emperors and bishops traveled to the desert just to yell questions up to the man on the pillar. He proved that the human will is stronger than the biological instinct for survival. He did not just preach that the body was a prison. He turned himself into a living gargoyle to show that the soul can only fly when the flesh is destroyed. Rationalism, the philosophy of pure logic, was born in the middle of an assassination attempt. Baruch Spinoza was a young Jewish merchant in the 17th century Amsterdam. He began asking dangerous questions about the Bible, suggesting that God was not a man in the sky, but the physical universe itself. To the religious authorities, this was atheism. One night, as Spinoza was leaving the synagogue, a man with a dagger lunged at him from the shadows, shouting, "Heretic." Spinoza dodged, and the blade slashed through his coat, but missed his heart. He did not fight back or call the guards. He went home and kept the torn coat for the rest of his life, as a reminder that emotion leads to violence, but reason leads to truth. The community response was the cherem, the most severe excommunication ever issued. The rabbis cursed him, forbidding anyone from speaking to him or reading his words. Spinoza did not care. He changed his name to Benedictus, moved to a quiet attic, and spent the rest of his life grinding lenses for glasses. He inhaled glass dust all day and wrote his ethics at night, dying young from lung damage. He died alone, but he died free from the superstitions that had tried to kill him.